A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and thank you for joining us for the 2 o'clock session, Farmers in Conversation. So I've got with me this afternoon, to my left, Craig Livingstone, Will Oliver and Phil White. So Craig farms down in Hampshire near Stockbridge. Will is in Leicestershire, sort of west of Leicester, and Phil is near Thame in Oxfordshire. What we're going to do is they're going to each present for about 7 minutes about their farm, about their farming system, and some of the challenges that they've faced along the way to get to where we are today. And then what we'll do is I'll open up and ask them a few questions, and then really this session is for you. So it's about questions from the floor. We've had a little chat around the back of the tent, and we're going to be open and honest and vulnerable, and so hopefully you'll be gentle but ask questions that you haven't had the opportunity to ask elsewhere. So we're going to start off, and Craig's going to tell us about his farm, and please do get involved and ask questions. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Can you hear me? Yes, you can hear me. I can hear myself. I appreciate you coming in this afternoon. It's so hot, but I'll give a light touch to 8 or 9 years of what I've been doing at Lockerley with the team, and then dive into some questions after that. First of all, I'll just start with our mission statement, which sounds a little bit corporate, but for how we run our business, it's really important. So we want to be a progressive, regenerative and successful farming business that champions an approach to agriculture where biodiversity, the soil and well-being of its community and future generations is at the heart of what it does. So the 2 farms I manage are owned by Mark, Julian and Sarah, and they're the children of Lord John Sainsbury and Lady Sainsbury. And we're 2 businesses 30 miles apart, just between Winchester and Salisbury. We're about a 2,000 hectare business. We've got 350 hectares of woodland, a big conservation project integrated through the whole business. Our farm gate produce, from selling flour to local bakers, and our 3 polytunnels and such like. We're a proud leaf demonstration farm. We're a beacon of regen ag for them, and also leaf mark assured. We have a big higher tier SFI and special area conservation and 2 triple SIs. Joint venture with sheep and cattle, 2 5,000 hectare catchment projects, and then some extensive community stuff that we try and be involved in. Part of what I thought I'd talk about, because I assume everybody's going to be familiar with the principles of regen ag, but it's really about land use. And I think land use, if you've read some of the National Food Strategy, read Henry Dimbleby's book, I think there's a huge amount to do with land use and how we go forward, integrating some of the SFIs and stewardship. So our last BPS payment was £306,000 in 2020 across what is a 5,000 hectare business. And that was going to be 0 by 2028. So adding complexities of changing a system from conventional to a sort of more regenerative standard, we had to think differently. So introducing things like miscanthus, identifying a solar opportunity, looking at where our farm, the map there with the 2 lines through it is 2 really important aquifers on a water with Southern Water, and then the land use change on one of the farms. The big map there is a higher tier scheme that's excluding the SFI options. So it shows you the mosaic and complexity that we as farmers are adding back in. I had a conversation with someone yesterday about complexity and efficiency, and how they have spent 10 years trying to reduce complexity and increase efficiency. And if I flick that on its head, for the last 10 years, we have been increasing complexity and probably losing efficiency. And I think that is something as regen farmers we have to accept. Money is often not talked about. And as I mentioned, the 300,000, the grey line on the graph, don't worry too much about the numbers, but the grey line on the graph is 300 and goes down to 0. But when you stack in your SFI payments, and we look at our CS payments, and there's some solar, miscanthus, some Southern Water payments and things, that changes that outlook considerably to safe, stable incomes. And it then enables us to concentrate on the best land to be better farmers. So that's a 16 and it's nearly a 17% land use change of our most vulnerable land, and probably our most highest impact land as well. And then again, just the numbers in that pyramid, I think we should accept and understand that for us, the 3rd or 4th best thing we can do is our rotational net margin is to have an arable crop. So we need to understand that these things have got to pay for their place on the farm also. but we're food producers and proud of it. So whistle stop through. We've got you can see on the back of the drill, there is the white tank. We put biology in the white tank, and that goes in with our seed. We've got a companion crop grown with some all seed rape, and then just some destruction of cover crop on one of the farms. What some of the future looks like for us. So polycropping, we've tried and we're looking, and hopefully we'll have an acreage of wild farming this autumn. Starting to understand infiltration rates, GPS mark those, and look what that looks like on farm. With my farmer hands, microscopy is not easy, but we're trying to get better. I was so proud to have snapped that nematode, so that's why he's there. Creating biologically complete compost, clover understory, and Johnson suit. Just that's what the future for us looks like. So we're quite excited about this in the system. I won't bore you with this, but it's mainly to say about it's tracking everything. It's baselining, it's tracking everything we're doing, so that we know what the start looks like and hopefully what success, and understand failure as well. From that, we churn out carbon balances. So we know that this is on one of our farm. We're at a net carbon balance of minus 1,000 tonnes. So this is all part of our process. It's a wider rotation. It's in looking at land use. And hopefully there'll be a marketplace at the end of this for us as we go forward. And nature never lies. There's 2 slides here. And when you work with the Hawk Conservancy, it's not us just painting a pretty picture. This is about nature never lies. So when they record more barn owl chicks in the boxes, the kestrel boxes, the field margins, the ecologists we work with, it's amazing. So I think just to end with this final slide, which is the beehive, one of the beekeepers on the farm found it so necessary to show us the picture of that slide with all the different colours of pollen. And I can't sit here and tell you a nice story. It's there for you to see. We're creating habitat, it's refuge area, it's more of everything. So I think it's a good way to finish from us. Thank you.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much indeed, Craig. We'll hold questions until the end, but Will, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about life in Leicestershire.
Hello, everybody, and thank you for having me here today. It's a real honour and a pleasure to be able to sit here and speak to you. So, just a little bit about me. I'm Will Oliver, a 4th generation on a family farm on the Leicester-Warwickshire border. I went to Harper Adams, graduated in 2011. Probably didn't learn as much as I should have, but made a lot of friends. And then came back home, sort of looked at what we were doing and thought I want to add value. So I did my basis and my facts, took on the farm agronomy, and it was very quick and easy to see that we were high input, high output, wheat rape rotation, which at the time we didn't have a problem with. But in the early 2000s, my father and my grandfather, they came out of the cattle job shortly after foot and mouth when subsidies changed, and we converted all the sheds to commercial lets, but we were really missing that muck. So it was time for change, really. We literally sat around the kitchen table, like many farmers can relate to. Every morning I go and have a cup of coffee with my dad. We have a talk about the business and we get out to work for about 8. And one day we said, look, we need muck. What should we do? So did a lot of feasibility studies, sat down with the bank, lots of different ideas, and the one that stacked up mostly for us and fitted our system was a poultry enterprise. So we've got 175,000 chickens, and we grow them with or for Avara, and we've got ground source heat pumps that are heating these sheds, solar panels, and it is a different way of farming. I appreciate it's probably not the sort of thing you normally see at Groundswell, but it absolutely revolutionised how we farm and the arable enterprise, because suddenly COVID happened. These sheds went up in 2019. COVID happened. Price of fertiliser rocketed, and we suddenly had this tool in our armoury that absolutely changed how we farm. So we scrapped second wheats, scrapped oil seed rape, and I started to really look how we can utilise these manures. So we've got now our rotation consists of first wheats, grain maize, and winter beans. So I'm using these manures mainly on my wheat and maize. So trying to use it in the spring where possible, because that's where I feel I'm getting the best out of them. We're doing trials with boffin this year, where our wheat has had chicken muck underneath it in the autumn, and then another block has had it on it in the spring, and I'm going to see what impact that is having on our crops. So yeah, just quickly touched on the rotation. So half our farm, which is about we're 2,000 acres in total. Half the farm is first wheat, 500 acres beans, 500 acres grain maize, and then that's also allowing us to incorporate cover crops. So we've got cover crops, which is really beneficial for our maize plants. So we're using rye and vetch, and then we can collaborate with our neighbours. We've got Bentley Suffolks working with Innovis. They're grazing our cover crops. And also now this year we're looking at companion cropping across the whole rotation, really embracing SFI. I know Craig touched on BPS. Our BPS was its peak value was 150,000. So we've got to replace that. Our SFI this year comes to 107,000. So we're well on the way with replacing it, and I've not taken any land out of production. I feel passionate about food production, and that is at the centre of what we do. So taking poor area out of production is fine, but I feel maybe investing in drainage and actually improving the land that we've got is the best way forward. Another benefit to growing maize is GLW Feeds are not far from us. They are quite keen to purchase it. And then also Avara this year have stated they want 2,000 tonne. So I'm going to send 2,000 tonne to Avara, which will go back into our own chickens. We're also feeding our chickens our own wheat and our own beans now as well. So that's really interesting. Like I've touched on already, nutrients hugely important to everything we do. Our rotation has changed on the back of all these nutrients. I'm doing SAP analysis now in the maize probably every 10 days, monitoring what's going on with that crop. Do I need any more to feed it? Any foliar N? Things like this. I'm doing all the agronomy myself, so it's great to come to things like this and learn. And I don't tend to say I'm on the regen journey because it's not a most popular word in our area, I don't suppose, but I'm definitely, I call it common sense farming. It works well. It's nice seeing sheep overwinter on the farm and bringing livestock back in. Biggest challenge, as you can see, apart from my ridgeback running at me, is establishing wheat after maize. This year we were combining maize into December, but we were direct drilling with our Horizon DSX, and crops look brilliant today. I'm really happy with how the farm's looking, to be fair. We wrote off some, but really pleased. That trash that we're leaving on the surface protected our soil beautifully. We're improving our organic matters, and we're not making any mess. Even after the year we're having very little ruts and stuff like that. So just quickly want to touch on the importance of getting off farm as well. Doing things like going to the Oxford Farming Conference or the Real Oxford Farming Conference, travelling around with different farming groups, coming to things like Groundswell. I just think it's hugely valuable. We're stuck in a little bubble of our family farm sometimes, and you can get a bit lost in it, and it can get, like mental health and everything, it can get a bit tiring and troublesome. So coming to things like this is just really refreshing, and I'd like to thank you all for having me.
Thanks very much, Will. And finally, Phil, you're going to tell us a little bit about life in Tame in Oxfordshire.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thank you, everyone, for having us. I'm feeling a bit daunted after those two presentations. We're just a little small 500-acre mixed family farm, South Oxfordshire. This is my attempt at sort of describing the start of my regen journey. I read that book on the left. Apologies to David Montgomery. I think he's got lots of lovely species, diverse, rich cover crops underneath his bales. I've just got a load of fat hen, but it looks good on the picture if you don't look too closely. Got to go a bit closer. So, we've been... I was really fortunate to come into farming. I grew up on the farm, and from the age of about 1, that was all I was ever going to do. And I went off to that great school of learning. Have we got anyone from Reading University? I saw they had a stand here. Reading University, yay. And learned how to do it, and then came home and said, right, Dad, we're going to have to change. And he was like, I don't think so. We sort of parted our ways, and I went off and did another career for a bit, and then came back rather abruptly in 2010 to take over a farm. And dear old chap, messing about with, 3 years of arable, and then he'd put it down to grass, and he'd plant trees, and wouldn't use all the chemicals that we were told to use, and never allowed to put any fertilizer on. Anyway, to paraphrase Mark Twain, when I was 21, my dad was a complete fool, but by the time I turned 40, it was amazing how much he'd learned. And all my mates said, you are so lucky, Phil. That's such an easy working farm. Soil's lovely. You're so lucky. Well, they say you make your own luck, don't you? And Dad certainly left the place in good heart. And over the next 6 or 7 years, I did my best to undo that. And we had some lovely yields to start off with, and then predictably, it all started to turn a corner as the soil lost its fertility and it all started to go downhill. And luckily, I was just in time. I think I was saved by Liz Jennifer. I think she's here, but listening to a podcast talking about an epiphany she had when she was in New Zealand about turning sunlight into energy, either feeding her livestock and turning it into meat or growing crops. And we got into planting some herbal lays. And treating them like solar panels, pumping that energy into the ground. And really that was the start of the turning point for me. I then got into, there's 1 or 2 books on the way, but we had really intensified the beef system, feeding a lot of maize, concentrates indoors and, mixer wagon and all that, burning a lot of diesel. But that book was another pivotal one for me, really now gone completely full circle and putting everything, keeping all the cows outside all year round, all the good stuff I suppose my only comment at this point would be, change doesn't just happen. We've all got a long list of jobs to do, and change is another job on top of it, and all that uncertainty. It's certainly been interesting. I got involved with Wild Farm last year. Harvest 2023 was our first harvest. We grew some 4-way blend of wheat with a clover understory. You see a photograph there. The reason I put that photograph in the bottom left, because I noticed where we'd been putting the bales out for the cows in a previous cover crop, I could see these waves of extra fertility where the bales have been. Trying to spread those bales out now and try and sort of spread the love a bit. But Wild Farm's been a great community to be involved in. And I think one of the wonderful things about it has been having that freedom to use pesticides removed from me has made it such a freeing experience, because now I don't have that choice. So, I've got to find another way to do the job and keeping the crop healthy by feeding it the right nutrients and really getting into that is obviously the way forward. And then, I think what I was going to say in the next breath was, it's about collaborating. I just heard, I think it was John Kemp this morning, might have been the first guy, talking about how much common ground there is. Within our hugely diverse systems, let's find the things that we all agree about and start there, and then work out where we might have a difference of opinion, and then discuss it. And I think that's what's so great about working together in groups like Wild Farm Group, the Precision Grazing Discussion Group that I'm part of, Pasture for Life, and there's a list as long as you're on, and they're all here, and here is part of that, isn't it? I think I just echo Will's point as well. This isn't easy, and really happy to take some questions about the highs and the lows. But it's, I think, so important for us to not only look after ourselves. I think we as farmers are not very good at that. We tend to think we're indestructible and just work, all hours, and we don't take enough time away to look after ourselves, but also looking out for and looking after each other.
Brilliant, thank you, Phil. And I think that's a great place to start, actually. I forgot to introduce myself. My name's Ian Pigott, and I farm about 20 minutes from here, just overlooking the pleasures of Luton Airport. And we've been trying regen farming for about 9-10 years ourselves, so I can sympathise and endorse what's been said. But I'd like to scroll back a little bit, Phil, from where you've just finished about Stronger Together, which I wholeheartedly agree with. And it's difficult to gauge where everyone is in the tent in terms of, whether they've been down this route for a long time or not so long. But I thought an interesting discussion which we've had independently is what are the blockers and what have been the things that have actually allowed you to go forth and trial new things and experiment and learn. And I know you've all got very different stories. I know I'm going to say, well, Will's dad went down this route. He had a 740A, which many of you might know the John Deere 750A, and I think it left in the nettles or whatever. So tried it, and so I'm interested in that cup of coffee discussion. But perhaps, Craig, you can tell us a little bit about your background and how you've been supported.
Yeah, so I said quite proudly that I'm lucky enough to manage a family owned by the Sainsbury family. And I think, or siblings of the Sainsbury family. And some people may go, well, it's easy for you, Craig, because it's a Sainsbury family. But we're harder on ourselves because of that. So our rigour in our experimenting, how we present stuff back to people, our numbers that run through our business, everything that we do we've got that extra little bit of pressure thinking if this is to be repeatable and we can gently influence or be part of sharing good and bad, we take that seriously. So, but I think it's the ability of an empowering landowner, I think, is often undervalued. We're incredibly lucky. So there's no free cash, believe me. Everything is like going to the bank manager. So if it's a grain store, a tractor, a drill, whatever it is, we cover all the things that Will would cover. And so everything has to be done to the same discipline. But knowing that your landowners see themselves as farmers is an amazing thing. And when they come to events like this with you and they share the risk, the highs and the lows, I think it's an amazing thing. So we're very lucky in that respect.
And so a supplementary there, Craig, do you try and quantify the value of the improvement in biodiversity or the way that the estate now delivers for the community? Do you try and put numbers to that?
Yeah, so one of the columns in our mission statement is about community. It's being an employer that we want to be that employer that people want to work with. So that's part of our mission. So yeah, we very much do. But I think advice into the farm is also really key. It's which is slightly there's a landowner piece, but also who we surround ourselves with. So we've got a great relationship with an ecologist, and we want to multiply this ecologist 10 times because you can't get across all the farm enough. So it's looking where the advice comes from to challenge us, because we don't want to be surrounded by weak people. We've got really good people in our team. We're trying to empower them, listen to them, me included. What goes well, what doesn't go well, and the wheel is spinning. It's exciting. It's a much more exciting place to be.
And we want to come back to the advice piece in a minute, but Phil, I'm going to come to you next because, forgive me if this is a bit sensitive, but we've just spoken about a very supportive landlord. Are you comfortable to go with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's really important to recognise that we're part owned, part tenanted, and we've just ended a tenancy on 150 acres. Absolutely golden opportunity came up 5 years ago to rent 150 acres next door. I mean, wow. And I felt like from my previous career, I got some skills in what they, I think, call stakeholder management, trying to explain this amazing transition that farming was just about to go through. And so off I went and explained what a herbal ley looks like. And at its best, it looks like that photo. And its worst, it's got a load of chicory that's bolted and some scrabbly old different height stuff. Nature. It doesn't look like Lord's cricket ground. And it's complicated. It's not as simple as I can sum up now. But after a few years of what felt like banging my head against a brick wall, trying to explain the economic benefit of all the changes that were coming in under SFI, which, let's face it, is pretty complicated and has been fluid, but also the feel your cows are mooing too much, or this is untidy, can you go and top it? And, well, yeah, of course I can go and top it, but it'll cost you. So I think it's a massive topic, isn't it? Tenant Farmers Association, I know, are doing lots of work on our behalf about how we engage with landlords to take them on that journey with us. Because I think it can be very challenging. And I threw in the towel on that particular one. But I know that is going to be an issue for people going forward.
Yeah, and I think perhaps it's something we might come to in questions, because the landlord-tenant relationship when it comes to biodiversity net gain and to carbon is really complex. But I do believe it's something we have to work on together, because there's a great opportunity, and it's, as you've already said, Phil, when we work together, it's much more fun as well. So thank you. Will, perhaps you can tell us about this cup of coffee and the transition.
So you mentioned the 740, yeah. So the late 90s, we had a 800 John Deere tractor on the 740, and it was nice shiny green, and I think we did it for about 8 or 9 years. The land went sad. Everything just once we had a wet year, it was impossible to farm. So the flat lift came out, plough came out, and then that was the case for probably the next 10 years. High intensity cultivations. Like I say, we didn't have the muck anymore. And and then it is a real barrier being on a family farm. It's like I'm in a fortunate position, I appreciate that, but when you are working and you have different beliefs, it can be a barrier. But sometimes you've just got to. I'm very fortunate that Dad lets me do what I want to do, and I've just got to proof is in the pudding, hopefully, and we're getting there. Soil health is improving. You mentioned how you measure it. We're measuring organic matter. We've panicked in the past and we've rented land out for potatoes for £400 an acre because we can't grow rape anymore. And then we've stepped back now and realised the impact that's had on our soils. So we have made mistakes, but we're on a journey now where we're definitely on the upward trend. I think soils are improving, and quite quickly. It's quite surprising how quickly these soils can improve. And I wouldn't say my dad would come to Groundswell with me, but he's certainly embracing the change, yeah.
Thanks, Will. I think that it's perhaps an interesting question to ask with regards to the metrics that we're using. So, we're still fixated with yield, tonnes per hectare, and are you trying to measure success in a different way at Lockley, Craig, and how are you translating that to the rest of your team?
Yeah, so there's the real answer is it does with farmers, and it's a business. So the one number that I care about the most in, be it the Agri Benchmark project, the AHDB Benchmark project, whatever it is, it's the rotational net margin per hectare. Individual crops, it's to me that's to the side. That is the one number that I really care about, and that's stacking all of the different things in. Be it, like we said, solar. It's what else can we do with solar? It's the it's miscanthus. There's all the other things. So there's the land use piece, but that pays our bills, and we can't ever forget that as farmers. However, there is that responsibility piece that we say we absolutely love producing food. 64% of our income last year was food production, so that has to be priority. But yeah, we do want to create local jobs for local people, but not really at a loss because it's not repetitive. So how can we do that? It's using things like hearing a nightingale for the first time recorded, which is a massive profit to us. How do we put a value on that? Well, that will come. So yeah, we value profit in lots of different ways, but very much with my farmer hat on, talking to an audience of farmers, we first and foremost, it's we have to remain profitable.
Thanks, Craig. Phil, is that something that you want to have a go at?
Yeah, I mean, just to add, one thing I was thinking and nodding as Craig was talking is I suppose it's the same in any business, but I only really know about a small family business. Whenever you look at the benchmarking, certainly only the benchmarking sessions I've been to, no one's ever benchmarked the cost of the borrowing on that money that you had to borrow from open field because you couldn't afford to pay for the seed for the next crop, or Agri to defer the payment for your pesticides for another 6 months, or the bank overdraft. I mean, it does come in. Obviously, it comes into your business planning, but I think that's a really important factor. The risk that we take, for everyone in this room, is our everyday business. But when things like Trussonomics happen and the Ukraine war, it's extreme, and it's getting more extreme. And stating the blindly obvious, the whole reason we had the subsidy system in the 80s and 90s was to stabilise that and to even it out. And we're entering in a period of much greater volatility, and finding ways through that, both financially and psychologically, I think is really important.
So I'm slightly putting the three of you on the spot here, but in light of what you just said, there will probably be people here who are looking at entertaining a new farm business tenancy or perhaps a contract farming agreement. We all know that this stuff doesn't happen overnight. So what does good look like for an FBT, could you describe it to me? What's the length? What are the things that you would want to be asked?
Yeah, I mean, we don't rent ground really. We're all owned. But if I was looking at for an FBT and taking on land, I'd want security and longevity. If you're going to invest your time and effort into these soils, I'd say you want time on your side.
So how much time will?
Well, 10 years, I'd say at least.
And what are we doing about the soil when you start and when you finish it? Is there a value attached to the quality that you've added?
Yeah, and like if you know you've got land for a certain period of time, maybe you could speak to the owner and say, look, let's look at a land drainage scheme or something like that. Whereas if you're on a short-term cycle, it's very hard to invest that sort of like money and things in, and time as well. You want to prioritise the land that you're going to have for the longest period of time.
Yeah, I think looking for more of an understanding. Next to this landlord I've just talked to you about, we've got the exact opposite, chalk and cheese. A guy who rents me his farm for 40 quid an acre. We're going to plant some trees together, aren't we, Phil? And, there is a certain onus on me to make that plan and make sure those trees get planted, and we'll look after each other. And I think that's more difficult, isn't it, to write into a contract farming agreement. But I think if you have shared values, that's more important to me than necessarily the detail of the contract.
So before we open to the floor, I've got a couple of questions that I can't finish on this one because it's a negative. But so Craig, what's been your greatest barrier to success so far?
Good question. Barrier to success, I would say, is surrounding yourself with the right people, because there is lots of speed bumps and magazines and various things to continuously tell you to put it on. So surrounding yourself with the right people, and I'm incredibly lucky with the team that I work within.
Brilliant, thank you. Will?
Yeah, I'm the same really. I've got good people around me, and the biggest barrier, I know it's a very boring answer, but the weather is a huge challenge to us, especially this year. And it can be quite disheartening when you try something and then the weather throws this curveball of an autumn, and it can put you off trying it again. But I would say don't give up and have another go, because no 2 years are the same. And yeah, the staff we've got, they're brilliant. I mean, and not only are I'm educating myself, but I'm having to educate the team around me as well, and that can often take time. And unfortunately, they can't all come to things like this today because there's still a job that needs to be done at home. But yeah, just getting good people around you and to keep learning. Yeah.
Yeah, but I guess your soils will be more resilient to the vagaries of the British weather, though.
Yeah, as time gets on, it should get easier, hopefully. Don't hold me to that, though.
Phil, do you want to add anything? And please, if you've got a question, stick your hand up and we'll come to you just now.
Yeah, we're all talking about people, aren't we? And I think that would be the thing. From our situation now, we've gone from a team of 4 or 5 to a team of 1.5 with my lovely wife in the audience. And recognising, A, your own capacity, and B, what skills you've got and what skills you don't have. And don't try and do everything. Don't definitely try and do things you're not very good at. And letting things go. I think it's been my biggest barrier. I'm letting them go gradually.
Brilliant. There's a microphone. We've got a question over here at the front. We might just have the one mic, so just bear with us for a second. So while we're just waiting for that question, I think you mentioned about advice, Craig, and I do have an opinion. You were trained as an agronomist and you worked in that field for some time. What do you think about the quality of advice that is around a subject that actually we're all learning, and there isn't a finite answer? Do you think it needs to improve? Do you think there needs to be a standard?
I think that with a foot in both camps, I think if you're asking advice into the business, we'd look at advice in two ways. Do we rely on advice to run our business, or do we ask for advice to enhance it? And we definitely want to ask for it and enhance our business. So I did the Dr. Elaine Ingham's Soil Food web course, did the Regen Ag 101 Academy for Gabe Brown and Alan Williams, been to Althorpe twice for the Nicole Masters thing, come to this. No one rolled a red carpet out for me to develop myself. So I take it seriously, because that is the direction of travel for our business, and then empower our team to do things. So Joel Williams' nutrition course that he did, two of our team have been through that. So it's not all about looking out for advice. I don't think it's not a race, but I think we're as far on in this journey as anyone else, and there's some great farmers that we go to and see through the Leaf network and things. So yeah, a mixed bag.
Brilliant. Can we have your question, please, and then we might carry on with these answers.
Sure, I actually have two, but I'll be really quick with them, I promise. So just in terms of business planning, I'm coming over from Ireland, so some of our challenges are the same, some of them are very different. With the United Nations restrictions on investment and finance into livestock farms on the basis of emissions, how do we, we're looking at the presentations here, and substantial investment is required to drive change. If those investments and access to finance are things we're locked out of, how do we ensure that we have access to finance and investment going forward to drive the necessary changes? And then kind of related to that, I noticed that all of you have, solar panels and initiatives that are decarbonising other sectors and reducing their emissions, but do nothing to reduce our own. What we've found in Ireland is that the incentives for those start out great at the start and then erode over time before you're doing it for practically free. Our national biomethane strategy now officially involves farmers providing free feedstock to the biomethane companies. How are we going to future-proof? From a business perspective, I don't mean that in a whiny way, but how do we future-proof income streams and investment and finance to ensure viability for us as farmers?
I'm going to let you think for a second. I think it's an excellent question, but in terms of response to the UN piece, I do think it's a very binary argument that's been put forward, and I do believe it will have to develop because we understand that the methane tracking is so different across different farming systems. So and that is, you can see here today the momentum of not just farmers but government policymakers understanding what regen is trying to achieve. It's not a silver bullet, but it's making us understand that what's good emissions and what's bad emissions, and if you want to look at carbon, it's understanding where you are in the supply chain and who owns which piece of carbon. Because if you're a miller, you might want insetting, and if you're an investor, you might want growth carbon. So there are very different pieces to the puzzle. Sorry. Yeah, say again.
That's blanketly just methane from cattle as judged in the IPCC inventory. It has nothing to do with systems. Like, we don't have carbon footprints. One half of our farm is in LULUCF, the other half of the farm is in agriculture. And so if you have agriculture emissions, that will dictate your access to finance. That's happening in Ireland right now with Rabobank.
Yeah, no, without getting into I'm aware, but I do believe that policy, there is movement in policy, realising that they have to understand that it isn't a simple binary methane number. In the same way that we saw Denmark 2 days starting to bring in, acceptable carbon levels that are going to be permitted within farming businesses. But anyway, enough from me. Any of you got an opinion on?
I'd just simplify it. We're farmers, we want to produce food, and we try and tell our story, and at the end of the day, food production is essential. And we can get lost with all this legislation and stuff that's going on in the background. And a lot of us are terrified by what we read in the press sometimes because we don't really understand it. And I just think we just want to get on with our day job and grow food and do it in the right way.
Yeah, I think aligned food chains. I spoke to 95 bakers last Monday, and it was a really simple conversation. It was farmer, miller, bakers. And that was just such a simplistic conversation, and it was amazing. It was aligned. We knew we could track. I know that from our carbon budget, for example, 700 tonnes emission from the arable side of one farm, 450 tonnes of that, 55% of that comes from nitrous oxide. If we're going to get serious about reducing that, it's about reducing nitrogen fertiliser. If I do that, I'm now at risk of, for 3 years now, we always produce group 2 wheats, we now produce feed wheat. So am I now producing regen feed and not regen food? So we then put stuff into poultry, pig and cattle diets, which if you read Ravenous, too much of the land is going to feed cattle. So this, I totally agree with you. The only point I would slightly disagree is the investment side of it. There is huge investment generally in agriculture. I wouldn't say there's more investment in, we've gone from 7 tractors down to 4. We've reduced our establishment of crops from £80 a hectare down to 36. We're less impactive. The borrowings and stuff will be there regardless how you're geared, owned, all of that stuff. So, but yeah, I agree on the story of methane. It's who owns it and whatever.
We've got a question at the front. Staff. Try again. Staff.
Hello. Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Ian. Yeah. I mean, what we've seen is obviously inspirational.
Can you repeat the question, Staff? Sorry. No, use the microphone.
I think what we've seen and the amount of nature that is on your
Keep going.
is pretty inspirational, and it's really important that what you're putting into nature is recognised by our markets. So the question is really how are you farmers monetising your regen credentials? Because as regen farmers, we know how difficult it is, and there should be a value placed on it. There is in the public sphere through SFI, but in the private sphere, every miller, every malter should be recognising this is the way to go and should be supporting us. And I just want to hear the stories that people have got.
Okay, so thank you, Staff. And for those of you at the back that couldn't hear, so the question is how are the panel adding value, because the regen farming isn't straightforward. There are costs involved, and how are we getting rewarded, or are we? Phil, I think it would be a really good time for you to talk about what you're doing with Wild Farmed and how that's going so far.
Well, as a fellow wild farm grower, Stafford, I know you know this, but what I think I decided, I did have a slide with my little mini trial of 40 hectares of wild farmed wheat for harvest 2023 against about 20 hectares of conventional wheat that we grew last year, X days. And for us, in a relatively low yielding situation, about 8 tonnes per hectare for conventional and about 5.3 for wild farmed, it all stacked up really well for on the wild farm side of the equation. And the reason I didn't put the slide in is that elsewhere in this show, Andy Cato is presenting with Grassroots about a system where stacking the SFI payments for cover crops, companion crops, no insecticides, so on and so forth, within that wild farm system suddenly starts to make that look an even more attractive proposition, with perhaps the beef on the net margin thing, the net rotational margin that Craig was just talking about. So I think it's really important to look at it through that lens. What we're doing personally is 2 more things. We had a long look at biodiversity net gain with the Environment Bank last year. Didn't quite go for it because we didn't think they were being very fair. Happy to talk to anyone in the Environment Bank about that after this. And part of a cluster in a landscape recovery project looking to bring private finance into the way we're going to farm as a group of about 40 farmers along the River Tame and the River Ock catchments. So yeah, it's all a little bit wait and see at the moment, but we're trying to collaborate together to leverage that private finance into the system.
So Will, if following on from what Phil said, if you're not, what would good look like?
Well, at the minute, like with grain maize, I see it as a niche crop. I'm competing against imported maize that's coming in. It's being priced off importing maize. So working with local dairy farmers, they see a value in buying in cracked maize from a neighbouring farm. So that's adding value. Also Avara, who we work with the poultry, they like the story that comes with a poultry farmer growing grain maize and selling that. So we're getting a premium there. And it's just
what about regen though? What about the regen system adding value?
Yeah, it's how we're farming it that is adding value. Not just the fact that it's not imported. It's how we're doing it, and that is important to these companies and to the neighbouring farmers. Yeah.
Thank you, Craig. Do you want to talk about that and what you're doing? You're doing a bit with the veg box to the story there. Have we got another question? Whilst okay, thank you.
Yeah, so we would use our learnings from, as opposed to saying, let's go sell carbon, we would say, let's do the carbon calculator, which we've done now for the last 7 years, and take the learnings from that and then track our performance in it. So it's usually the savings that we've made operationally. But yeah, creating our own market, being a little bit Oxford Real Farm Conference disruptive, quietly disruptive. It's creating our own, I've worked with a miller from the beginning We're creating a regen contract for wheat, and there'll be a premium attached to it. ADM, we're selling our all-seed rape to them for the £50 a hectare for the 8 principles or whatever it is. So these things are developing, but we're not being patient, just sitting on our hands. We'll hopefully have 20 hectares of wild farming this autumn. We'll be part of, veg boxes to the door. We sell wheat flour direct to a baker in 5 miles away. So we're trying.
Brilliant, thank you. A question at the front here.
Thanks very much for your honesty, guys. It's refreshing, and it's sort of good to have that sort of shared experience where we've all had our ups and downs. I wanted to ask you about, we obviously know that there's financial side to this, and now we hear people talking about natural capital. I know what that is, and obviously that's what some of us are striving towards. But we've taken on this huge challenge, and I was wondering, in terms of personal capital, the risk you've taken and the tough times, is there a benefit personally, that sort of man's search for meaning, that at the end of the day, what you're doing, what does it mean to you, and is that part of this payment that we haven't, said a whole lot about when you sleep at night and when you say, look, guys, kids, here's what we did, we did our best, and this is what we're looking beyond just money. Do you know what I mean?
I think it's a great question. Phil?
I think she might be in the audience, but I hope you have all seen 6 inches of soil by now. When you do, look out for Nick Renison, who's sitting at her kitchen table saying, well, what are we going to tell our kids that we couldn't be asked? And I just think it absolutely summed it up for me. I mean, it's the right thing to do. Now let's find a way of making it pay and making it work. Because if it doesn't pay, we're not going to be there very long doing it. So we better make it work.
Also, I'd say probably, although we're very busy on the farm, we're farming in a way that we can have weekends off now. And I've got a 3-year-old and an 8-week-old, so I probably shouldn't really be here. There's a lot more time to be at home, I would say. And for the staff as well, I'm a bit more... Back probably the previous 2 generations, they might have said we're going to work every Saturday because that's what we do. Whereas now it's like, we'll only work Saturday if we have to. And that's... That, like you say, that isn't money, is it? That's good for your mental health, and it's just good for your family life and the future. And the family's the next generation anyway, so that's as regenerative as it gets.
And lucky for Will, he gets to see what a 10-year-old and a 13-year-old kids do. He'll have a hairline like mine in a minute. So, I think it's a privilege to manage somebody else's farm. I don't have a family farm to go back to, so we've got real identified goals, what we want to pass on to the family's children and what they can inherit. But also I look at my own children. I've got Crohn's disease, so I've had that since I was 23. I really don't want my children to have it. It's not great. So that kind of, microbiome, plant, soil biome, all that stuff for me is like just a bit addictive. I love reading about that type of stuff. So, my wife's got a greenhouse. We just got into this. We've just loved it. It's amazing to be part of this movement. But it's way bigger than just us. But our impact individually is massive if we get it wrong. So these little changes are big.
Thank you, guys. And I think the other thing that I've found with our business is we've made some great friends along the way. The networks that, be it through WhatsApp or amazing events like the Cherries have put on here, is that we're all learning, and that open mindset. And I think that it doesn't matter whether it's someone who, with no ranking, whether it's the person that owns 50,000 acres or the person that sweeps out the cows, or, we all can add something to the conversation. Everyone's opinion is valid. And so if you have a WhatsApp group, make sure it's not just the people that look after the farm. Make sure it's everybody who's involved that can talk about it. Because I think that's how you get most fun out of it, is that we can all show a bit of vulnerability and put our hand up when we know we got it wrong. A question? Thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. That was a really great session. I just wondered what you all think of the current agricultural education system, and do you have much hope for it? Because I don't.
Can I just clarify? Are you talking about FE and HE, or are you talking about skills?
I'm talking
or
about...
in schools?
Well, partly in schools. So much to do in schools. But I'm thinking when students go to Harper Adams, Newcastle, all those big agricultural universities, I speak to some of them, and I don't hold out much hope.
And do you have a bias or an interest in this space?
I just think they're failing woefully.
Is this because people that are maybe coming to
yeah,
work in
so
your business?
we quite often have burly, sometimes they're girls, but quite often they're boys, men, and they come with their kind of tire kicking mentality, and it slightly worries me that the younger generation hear climate change, all that stuff, and they've heard it so much they've become blasé to it. Yeah.
Okay, I think it's a really good question, actually. Phil,
I've just been told I need to mention Nick, who is a burly, tyre-kicking, 23-year-old Newcastle University graduate in agribusiness. Now, I can report in on Nick. He can definitely play rugby. He's very good at that. He's honed his beer drinking skills. He had a lovely time at Newcastle. He's made a great bunch of mates. I think he would, if he was here, say he was slightly disappointed because he's watching his old man, getting stuck in with all this sort of wild farm stuff, precision grazing, mob grazing, and they're not really covering that in the syllabus. I think there's a bit of that is what you're getting to. That said, I think he and all his mates and the students that we've had through on placement years with us from Harper Adams have been outstanding, actually. So maybe we need more of that. We need more of the work experience learning on the job rather than expecting to sit in a lecture theatre and learn it. Maybe there's not, more of that.
That's really, it's a fantastic side of things to see. I'd be quite interested whether or not you two, how you've got on with trying to attract people into your businesses, maybe at peak times, and is the lure of being in a regenerative business, does that help?
If you said to any of my Harper lecturers or anyone that even knew me at Harper that I was going to be sat up here today speaking to you, they would not have believed you. So I think probably I almost think we're too young when we go to uni to want to learn. I think you go for a good time, make friends. I'm not saying it's the right or wrong thing, but I don't think I wanted to learn until I was actually back home in a practical situation. So yeah, maybe being more practical. But we've got a chap that works for us. He's been with us for 36 years, so he's been through a lot of changes, and he's really good. A chap that's been with us for 6 years, he's good. And an 18-year-old, and actually I'd say the 18-year-old, he's the one that's obsessed with ploughing and the older ways because he's fresh out of college and that's what he's been taught. So, but yeah, we're all open to change. But I just think, if I looked at myself back when I was at Harper, not a nice person really. But
Craig.
Yeah, mine would be like one level back from that would be like National Food Strategy. I sat on Henry Dimbleby's ag panel, advisory panel for that. And there's so many, I mean, it's been thrown to the side and I don't know if it's been referenced, but, a snapshot, read Ravenous or get it on audiobook. And, it's absolutely fundamental to education and not just about agriculture, but about the food system. The whole thing is woefully broken. Who comes through college and we employ everybody. So we're not a big team, but we don't have lots of students onto the farm, so I can't comment on the standard. But who we do have are basically retraining themselves a degree via YouTube at the moment and come into things like this because there's so much info that's available specific to how we farm. So,
and I just add one thing. I mean, personally, I embarrass him, but my farm manager's here, and he's not that long out of the RAU, and I just think very, very lucky that we are getting people of that calibre. But with regards to the younger ones in schools, it's a place where I do a lot of work with education and with charities, and I think the schools are really understanding the importance of messaging young people about the role that land use and farming has within everyday lives, and they don't see it in a silo anymore, and it sits, and there's no end of places in the curriculum where it is now relevant. And I'm seeing so much more demand for schools to call upon farmers to speak. So I think that's a really positive thing. We've got one more question at the back, and I think this might be our last.
Hello. Izzy Eames, Harper Adams student and proud. Ex-Harper Adams student, sorry, I've left now. So just a quick question about slate tests and context. So I went to a soils course the other week and a slate test where it's from a hedgerow, beautiful clear water, and I thought, gosh, that's perfect. And then the following week, I went to a farm walk where it was a bit of a challenging field. They'd applied some gypsum. The slate test was all dark and brown. I thought, oh, he's got some bad soil. And they said, no, that's what we're wanting it to do. We want it to do that. And the question is about context. How important is context in terms of regen farming, of what you see in one place might not work exactly where you are? And how do you get that sort of understanding, I think?
Well, I'm going to start with you, Craig. That's a really difficult question.
It's a really good question. So we did it. Our farm cluster had a soil scientist come into the room. I mean, maybe 20 farmers sat around with microscopes and looked under there, and nobody could find anything. And we were all really disappointed. We'd become really bad farmers, and nobody had anything that we wanted in there. And then just as we were about to all go home, the soil scientist said, well, of course, it's all pH 8.2, so it's bacterial heavy. So we came away and said, well, OK, so we're not going to see this 1-to-1 ratio of fungal-bacterial ratio. And we're not, so exactly as you say, so the bedrock, what John Kempf said this morning about the bedrock, all of that context is massive. So we weren't bad farmers, but what we've done, we've understood that we are, on most of our land, pH of 8 and above. So we need to produce we need to produce different types of extracts. So we want fungal-dominated extracts. Or we produce like a lucerne tea. We're looking at that next year for looking at increasing protozoa. So it will feed on bacteria and then it will generate nitrogen and things. So yeah, great question. And we were in exactly the same place.
Brilliant. And Phil, quick sum up on that one.
I think context is such a great thing, isn't it? We've sort of got an operator's manual, how to do it. And then we apply our judgment to every situation. And it's not just a slate test or the wider soil science or the way we manage our farm. It's how we do relationships and everything. Context is everything. If I go up and tickle my wife and she's in a mad mood, she'll give me a black eye. But if I do that and she's in a good mood, it might go differently. Context.
OK. Will, do you want to add anything to that? Not about Phil's wife.
I can't follow that.
No. OK. Well, I think that sounds like a good place to finish on. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please join me to thank our three speakers, Craig, Will and Phil.